For now, I just want to take the time to applaud all the women living in mining affected communities. Aluta, continua, we see you, we celebrate you, we are with you. Hi Irootfornature family, and welcome to another video. Happy Women's Month to all of your beautiful ladies here, and welcome to those of you who are new and have just joined the family. It is so good to have you here. If you've been part of the family for a while, you know that we are currently going through a series on Environmental Law 101, and recently we've just started talking about the law as it pertains to mining and the environment. If you've not watched the first part of the series on mining and the environment, please go back and watch it because it actually relates to what we're going to be talking about in this video today. And then also, if you've not watched some of the previous videos on Environmental Law 101, I suggest that you probably pause this video, go and watch those because they do provide some important context on what we're going to be talking about. So the series starts off with what the environmental right actually is, and we move to NEMA, which is like the Bible as it pertains to environmental law. And now we're talking about mining and the environment, which is such an exciting and controversial topic. And speaking of controversies, it is Women Month now, right? And I just thought, since we're already on the topic of mining and the environment, what better way to kickstart this month than talking about the gendered impacts of mining? So as we discuss issues around environment, climate change, development, and generally what the law says, I do think it's actually very important for us to start talking about specific impacts on specific groups of people because they vary. Not everyone is affected the same way. I do think that it's important for us to have an understanding of the realities of how people's lives are actually affected by mining development activities. And like I mentioned earlier, different groups of people are affected differently. However, it is common cause that women, children, and the elderly, they suffer the most from negative environmental consequences. So in this video and this month in general, I'd like us to focus on the gendered impacts of mining. That is how mining affects women who are living in mining affected communities, but also women who are actually working in the mining industry itself. So I'm going to be fleshing out some of these issues with you guys, and bear in mind that this is actually a mini series that is attached to the Environmental Law 101 Mining and the Environment series, so you kind of have to go through them together. I just thought it is very important for me to also start talking about this, especially now that we're in Women's Month, where we are celebrating women and we are recognizing some of the challenges that they face, and all the other things that they have to go through. So I just thought it's also important to have this mini series running as well. So this is actually just going to be the first video, which is an introductory video to the whole mini series, where I'm just going to be laying the foundation for the rest of the series. So I hope you guys actually get to understand the basis, the foundation, and as we build up on it in the coming weeks, we also start to get a much clearer view as to how mining actually affects the lives of women living in mining affected communities and women working in the mining industry. For the purposes of this video though, I am going to be focusing on women living in mining affected communities because I do feel that they have stories that deserve to be told. It's not to say that those working in the industry, they don't, because their stories are equally as important, but I do want to focus on this particular group of people because I do have some stories that I have gathered during my line of work that I think would be good as a way to lay out the foundation for this mini series. So without wasting more time, let's get into it. So in my line of work, we do interact a lot with women living in mining affected communities as part of the work that we do. And the stories that they always tell you, they are stories that deserve to be told, and they're so touching, because one would think, how does one actually survive in a community like this? They always talk about all the struggles that they face living in such a community, but also in that you also see a representation of strength and power within them, as they always strive to do something to rise above their circumstances to the best of their abilities. And that is something that I think is worth celebrating. And I just want to focus on one community here, because their story kind of stayed with me when I heard it. For some reason, it stuck with me. It's not to say that other stories are not important, but it's something that I've been thinking a lot about, ever since I heard that story. And I actually thought, it'll be nice to actually talk about this here on this channel. I do feel that their stories deserve to be told. The true cost of mining deserve to be laid bare on the table, because oftentimes we have government and mining companies mostly focusing on profits, pleasing shareholders, economic growth. But the truth is that on the other side of that coin are people's lives that are being detrimentally affected by these activities, and we don't hear much of that. So I do think that if we are going to be talking about environmental law here, it is also very important for us to touch on what's the actual consequences of some of the decisions that are made. It's very important for us to know that, because we can't live in a bubble where we think that nobody's being affected or the impacts are not that big. So I do want us to start touching on that. And I do hope that this video will provide sort of like a foreground to the discussions we're going to be having in future here on this channel. The community that I'm referring to, this is a low income community. There is high unemployment rates, and the women I met there, they're not just like lovely people, right? They have real life stories that just break your heart. Obviously, for safety and confidentiality reasons, I'm not going to go into who's who in this video. It's for my own safety too. But I would just give a general overview of the common themes that often come up, especially when you're talking to women living in mining affected communities, but also that also came up when I was talking to this particular community, without revealing too much or identities or specific details, but just like the general themes. So generally, this is the landscape of the area that this community lives in. So we have this community that is living here in shacks. They don't have proper homes built with like strong materials or anything. It's mostly shacks, and literally right next to them, just across the road, is one of Eskom's big power stations, and then less than a kilometer away from them, probably about 200-500 meters away from them, is a big coal mine that is owned by one of the biggest mining companies in South Africa. And then also other coal developments are being authorized in that area, and some have been proposed just in the surroundings, right? And then about 10 kilometers or less from them, there is another big Eskom power station. So literally, they are going through pollution from the power stations, especially the one that's right next to them, because they're breathing all the fumes, they're breathing all the toxic air pollution that is being emitted, the gases and all that. And at the same time, there's this big mine that's like next door to them. All the blasting from the mining is affecting them. It's affecting their homes. Water has been contaminated. It comes out brown, and sometimes with like black particles from all the soot from the coal, right? And then also they can't breathe properly, because the air pollution from the power station, the dust particles from the mining, everything is just like coming at them. They're just like right in the middle of all of this, right? So that's the setup of this community. And most of the women living in this community, like all the other mining affected communities, do not even directly benefit from these mining activities, because they're not even employed at the mines, right? Due to qualifications or other reasons. So I'm just going to pause here and say this was just the backstory to what inspired me to actually doing this video. But the issues that those women brought up, they're not unique to their community. They are issues that are very familiar, very common in a lot of mining affected communities. So as we proceed, just bear that in mind, that in as much as I told you a story about a particular community, it is not just about that community. These are common impacts across the board when it comes to mining and the impacts it has on women living in mining affected communities, right? Generally, women living in mining affected communities, they struggle to actually get jobs at the mines. It's an issue of qualifications, and also because men are generally preferred for mining jobs. So this means that women are left generally to fend for the families, take care of the home, take care of the man. Or if they're employed, it's like low paying jobs like in the service industry. Or if they do get jobs at the mines, most of them, they do get like general odd jobs, right? Like cleaning. A common trend when it comes to the impacts of mining on women living in mining affected communities is that quite a number of women living in these communities end up having to sell their bodies to get jobs at the mine. And this is mostly because it's very difficult for a woman to just like go in and get a job like fair and square, right? So some people end up having to sell their bodies. Something also related to that is the issue of teenage pregnancies. And this is mostly because the men who are working at these mines, they lure these young girls in the communities only to leave them pregnant and single, and then they have to raise these children on their own. Because when it comes to mining jobs, one thing that is common with them is that a lot of the people who work at the mines, their contracts are not permanent, they're temporary contracts. So people get like 3 months contracts, 6 months contracts, 12 months contract, 18 months, but at some point these contracts are going to come to an end, right? And when they do that, they just like pack up and leave and go back to their families, and they leave these girls with little babies or pregnant. And now there's just like a lot of single mothers who don't even know how to fend for their own children, because also high unemployment rates and opportunities for work are limited in those places. So that's also one of the impacts of mining. And then something that is also very important but often overlooked are the health impacts of mining activities. By this, I mean how mining actually affects the health of the people living in this community. So going back to the story of this community I mentioned earlier, their impacts are a bit more because it's not just the mining, there's also surrounding power stations, right? So the health impacts of that, these are things that people often don't talk about. But even when it comes to mining itself, that dust from mining activities, all the tracking that is going on as they're transporting the resource to the next destination, that is something that can affect people's health in terms of respiratory illnesses, because dust is fine particles. It can actually get into your respiratory system, and people end up getting illnesses such as asthma and then also eye problems as a result of living in such areas. A lot of research has been done around the health impacts of dust and air pollution, especially for people who are living, say, in the Mpumalanga Highveld, where coal mining is rife. There's lots of power stations too. And then if you also read the Daily Air judgment that came out a year ago, you can also get a vivid picture of how people's lives are being affected by these development activities. The heartbreaking part of it all is that a lot of the people who are living in this community, they cannot afford proper health care. So that means that they're just going to be suffering from all these illnesses, but they can't even go to a doctor. And then sometimes, even if they can get a consultation with the doctor and they are told that, oh, this is always a result of all the pollution around you or the dust that's coming at you, one of the solutions that often comes up is you have to move. And the question is, where do they move to? This is their home, right? You brought this development activity to them. So where do you want them to move to? You were supposed to put in proper measures in place to ensure that they do not get affected like this, but you were not, right? And now their health is compromised, and you're telling this poor person who cannot even afford to live where they are right now that the only solution to your health right now is for you to move and find somewhere else to go and live? Like, seriously, guys. So this is some of the issues that people have to go through, and women in particular have this at the worst, right? Because they have a primary role as caregivers, which is as a result of patriarchy and the inequalities in our society, which is another topic on its own. But they have these roles, so now they have to take care of themselves, they have to take care of their husbands, they have to take care of their children, who are all suffering from all these health impacts, including their elderly parents and relatives as well. So you can imagine the burden that is now placed on these women who have to go through all this and still be able to take care of themselves. So now you can start to get the picture in relation to the burden it then places on these women living in these communities, because it's not just about them. They are also being affected, right? But they also have to take care of everybody else who is related to them or closely living next to them, who is also being impacted by these activities by virtue of the fact that patriarchy and the gender inequalities of this society put that burden on women naturally. It is not fair. It is something that needs to be considered when you're now making decisions as to how exactly is this development activity going to affect women. And one of the things that is lacking in our system is actually gendered impact assessments, where the gendered impacts of such activities are actually assessed, and you see how many women are going to be affected, and you look at how exactly women are going to be affected and how you're going to address that. In fact, the proposal is for you to actually assess if the project should go on, considering the impact it's going to have on women. But we currently don't really have that in our system, and that is something that we now need to start thinking about, because the impacts of mining activities on women, they are huge. You know, they're affecting people in such a bad way, and we cannot keep ignoring that. We cannot keep casting a blind eye to that. So something definitely needs to be done. Another issue that often comes up as well is issues around HIV and AIDS. And this is such a big issue in these communities. Quite a number of people are sick from the disease. And this is mostly because the men are messing around, right? And they come back home and they're infecting their wives. And now we have a community full of people suffering from this. And because there's also a lot of migration that happens when mining comes in, some of the people who are bringing in these illnesses are people who are probably not originally from this community, but they're bringing it in. And because they're sleeping around and messing around with girls, with other women, and all that, the infection spreads. So that is also another common issue that often comes up. And as we now know, mining has a detrimental impact on water resources. It not only consumes a lot of water, it also poses a threat to water resources due to contamination and the pollution of those resources, right? We did talk about this in the first video on mining and environment, but it was pertaining to the reasons as to why then mining companies have to be issued with a water use license before they embark on mining. But here in this particular video, the impacts of mining on water resources is actually detrimental on women, in the sense that, first of all, if we're looking at women who are living in rural and remote areas, in most of these areas, water is already an issue. It's not readily available, right? It just doesn't come out from the tap. Women have to go and fetch water again, because of that primary role of care, right? So they have to go and fetch water, and you find that sometimes the next water resource to where they live is like 8 kilometers away, 10 kilometers away, or maybe 4 or 5 kilometers away. People are having to wake up very early in the morning to go and fetch water, right? And then come back and then do all the other domestic duties that they have to do. Now, put a mining company in the mix, it comes, it pollutes this nearest resource, which was probably 4 kilometers away. That water is no longer drinkable. People now have to look for the next water resource, which could be 10 kilometers away. And because it's still women who still need to go and fetch that water, you've just increased their distance from 4 kilometers to 10 kilometers. Imagine that walk from your homestead. Every single morning at 4 a.m. you're waking up to walk 10 kilometers to go and fetch water. And then because it's not just you, there's going to be a queue. Maybe it takes you an hour to get to a point where you now actually have that water in your container. And then now you're having to walk back home another 10 kilometers with that water. You get home, you are tired, but you now have to prepare food for people. You make sure the kids are bathed. You basically now having to do all the other domestic duties that you have, and then maybe at the end of the day again you have to go back, fetch more water, come back home, prepare people for the evening, prepare meals for the evening, and then tomorrow morning you're back at it again. Imagine how much that is so detrimental to the health of these women, but not just their health, but also their own personal development. Because if all you're doing is fetching water and taking care of people in the homestead, at what point are you going to sit down and do things that actually grow you as a person, things that build you up as a person? So there's not much room for personal development for them, and this is something that then just exacerbates all the inequalities that we are already facing in this country. You know, gender inequality is such a real thing, and these are some of the issues that exacerbated in this country in a time where we actually want to reduce them, we want to bridge the gap. So when we're thinking of the impacts of mining on water, we kind of have to think about how it not only affects the quality of the water, but the quantity, and all of that has an impact on women living in these communities where water is already scarce and they're already going through a lot just to get a 20-liter bottle or, you know, buckets of water. And another option in some of these communities that either they now have to go and fetch the water wherever it is, or they have to buy the water. But remember, these are poor communities. Not a lot of people are going to have money to be buying water every single day, so they now have to stick with the option of actually going to fetch the water. And we have to be honest, even in as much as some municipalities try to help these communities by bringing JoJo tanks every week, a JoJo tank does not last a whole community a whole week. At some point that water is going to run out, and that's probably on day 2, and these people are stuck again. So we need to really think about some of these impacts. It may seem like, oh, it's just water, it's normal, people go fetch water from a river, but we have to really think about it in terms of the development activities we're now going to have to bring into these communities. So spatial planning also becomes very important. What are we using our land for, and how is it affecting the people who live there? That is such an important consideration when you're approving some of these big development activities that we all like when we're just thinking of profit, but we're not thinking of the social impacts on people's lives and the inequalities that already exist, and how that is actually going to exacerbate those inequalities. That is such an important consideration, and something that I also want you guys to start thinking about as we're going through this topic of mining and the environment here on this channel, but also in relation to all the other development activities that are being proposed. I think it is time for us as a nation to actually reassess our approach to approving development projects, and to actually think, what kind of development projects do we want in our country, and also protects the vulnerable people, and women and children and the elderly, like I said, are really one of the biggest groups that are always affected when we're making some of these decisions. The stories of women living in mining affected communities are so important, and like I said, they deserve to be told, because this is the part of development projects that we often overlook for profit and pleasing shareholders and growing the economy. But actually, on the other side of that coin, lives are being destroyed. People's lives are being affected in such a way that they're not able to live to their full potential, or like live to a standard that they would have if those projects were never in those communities. And if you're talking about justice, that is such a big injustice. And this is where the notion of environmental justice comes in. It is the notion that when it comes to development activities, it is often the people living in poor communities who then bear the brand of the negative environmental consequences of these projects. It's not the people living in towns. It is not the people doing the mining itself most of the times. It is the people who live in those areas who suffer from the realities of the environmental degradation. They are the ones who are left with polluted water. They are the ones who are left with contaminated soil. They can't even plant their crop anymore on that land. They are the ones who are left with the health impacts of those activities. While some of us are not living there, so we're just enjoying the benefits, right? We are probably enjoying the profits, or we're enjoying the products that come from those activities, but we never stop to think about the person who lives in that area and what they are going through. particularly the women who live in those areas and what they're going through. And it is time as a society we start to reflect and think about that. So generally, the point I'm trying to put across here is that development projects such as mining, they do not benefit women, but rather just place an extra burden on their shoulders. Think about the pollution from the project, it affects their health. The water pollution from mining projects also means that there's a lack of access to clean water. Soil contamination means that their crops or vegetable gardens are affected, they don't thrive. This affects the availability of food and water for their survival. And if you're thinking of Section 27 of the Constitution, it says that everyone has a right to sufficient food and water. And look at what this project is doing. Never mind the environmental right that says that everyone has a right to a clean and healthy environment, but look at what's happening to the lives of these people. Their safety is also at risk as there is an influx of men in the communities, which also means an influx of violence. Let's talk about GBV, because that is also something that is rife in these communities. And sexual harassment is such a big issue. There is also a lack of job opportunities for women living in mining affected communities, which means that their personal development is affected and they'll always fall behind the man. And because of our culture, which unfairly I would say has made the woman the primary caregiver, they're expected to do all the domestic duties and take care of everyone, with environmental degradation added to that as a result of, say, mining activities. It only means that an extra burden has been placed on their shoulders, and they now have to find alternative sources for water, food and other services to sustain their lives and the lives of their loved ones. It is such an unfair phenomenon, and that's why I think that it is very important for us to start talking about this now. The burden that is placed on women living in mining affected communities is a great one, and it cannot be ignored. It is very important for development projects to take into account the needs of women living in these communities before they proceed with these activities. In fact, even decision makers have to take into account these impacts before any project is approved. Like, does it hurt to actually just look at a project and say, how are you going to affect women? No, this is bad, you're not proceeding. Like, just make that the sole reason for not allowing this to happen, because women matter. The impacts on their lives, they matter, and we need to put them first. We need to prioritize this. In the next few videos, I'm actually going to expand a little bit more on these issues that I just talked about here in this video. I'm going to be talking about why development projects actually do not benefit women, especially women living in mining affected communities. And we're going to be talking about the climate impacts on women, and a whole lot of other topics are coming. So I hope you guys stay tuned. If you've not subscribed to this channel yet, this is the time for you to subscribe, because you do not want to miss out on any of this. For now, I just want to take the time to applaud all the women living in mining affected communities who are doing their best to survive in spite of all the challenges, and for those who have also decided to take a stand against polluters and negative development practices and reclaimed their power. Aluta continua, power to you. We see you, we celebrate you, we are with you. So guys, like I said, this is part one of a mini series I'm going to be doing on women and the environment and how development projects actually affect their lives. I hope you guys enjoyed this video and have gained some insight on some of the lived realities of women living in mining affected communities, and given some thought also on why we actually need to take the gendered impacts of mining seriously and address the inequalities that are created as a result of it. I also do hope that this will inspire all of you to join and fight for environmental and climate justice, because this is not just an individual fight, it's a collective fight. We are all affected, and it is very important for all of us to stand together. Thank you guys for watching this video. Please don't forget to like and share this video. Please share your thoughts on what you think about what we've just been talking about. And also, if you're living in mining affected communities, I'd really love to hear your stories, because I think your stories deserve to be shared, they deserve to be told. And if you've been watching this video up until this point and you're not subscribed, like, come on, what are you waiting for? Please hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so that you're notified every single time I upload a video, especially in the next coming weeks. You do not want to miss out the videos that are coming up. And until the next time, guys, stay tuned, keep fighting, and keep the earth clean.